I have been teaching at Clark Atlanta University since 2005. I taught previously in graduate school at Auburn University and then at my postdoc program at Emory University Medical School. And I have been a professor of psychology since 2005 here in Atlanta. Kathleen Peterson was allegedly murdered by her husband, author Michael Peterson. And I say allegedly because he was granted a new trial. I will say that most of us certainly believe that he is the killer. But so many things came out of this case that we did not know about law, and so many things that were started in the legal system regarding cases like this kind of began with this case. It became a bit even more landmark than it already was. So, when this first occurred, we hear about a 911 call and a man finds his wife at the bottom of a staircase, dead, and it looks apparently due to having a little bit too much alcohol and mixing it with Valium, and she falls down the stairs. And, when you do this kind of work and you're looking at criminal profiles, we have to be honest that when we find dead women, we are almost always at least moderately suspicious with their male boyfriend, partner, lover, somebody. That is almost always where we at least start looking. Even if it looks like a suicide or an accidental death, most law enforcement people will either privately or publicly agree there's always a little bit of a search. We always look at someone close romantically to that woman. Why do we do that? Because it has been so common. The profile information really speaks for itself, that these are, often you can find the killer within a woman's kind of romantic circle of men. And so he is, some interesting things about this case that make it really interesting to teach students about. There are just some landmark occurrences, like moving one's trial based on a judge believing that someone will not be able to get a fair trial. So most of us know that juries are pulled from society. They're kind of pulled from your local peers. If you live in a particular area, though, it's hard to find people who are not familiar with the case. This has been true in a lot of large cases before, whether we're talking about the OJ trial, when there were talks about whether or not Michael Jackson was going to end up on trial. How can people with this kind of fame, how can we gather 12 people who really haven't heard much about it? And it was determined that we probably couldn't in the Michael Peterson case, that if we pulled people from his local community, they would be so closely tied to either him or Kathleen that it would be difficult for a fair trial to take place, right? So that's something that's interesting. Another interesting part of this case that is always taught in my classes, we talk about the Alford plea. And this is something that I think people do regularly in their personal, experiences all the time, not knowing that is actually possible to do in court, where you go ahead and accept, that I am probably going to be deemed guilty, but I am maintaining my innocence. And most people don't assume that that's a possibility, that that's an actual plea. Normally, I am guilty. Yes, I did it. I am not guilty. I did not do it. And so the Alford plea is kind of this middle ground. I understand that the evidence against me is going to probably convict me. However, I'm going to maintain that I did not commit the crime. So when he entered that plea in his new trial around 2017 or so, Michael Peterson then is found guilty of manslaughter. And of course, since he had been in jail the entire time since his first conviction, it was considered time served. So of course, there are people who think this is an absolute miscarriage of justice, and there are people who are close to him that are saying, thank goodness that this was a possibility because we believe that he is innocent. But then there are more pieces to the puzzle here, right? We also find out that this is not the first woman that Michael Peterson oddly finds dead at the bottom of a staircase. In fact, the staircase is for many people, that's one of our favorite movies, one of our juiciest things that come on, when we're watching true crime documentaries. And it's it certainly is a coincidence. You know, you cannot convict people based on coincidences, but I mean, it's just hard to ignore that another person linked to Michael Peterson would die in a similar fashion. And that autopsies would show for both women that there were lacerations about the head that seemed like they might not have been caused by the fall. So, since that was found in both of those victims slash accidental death victims, it does stand to reason. It's hard to believe that Michael Peterson may not be behind it, but it really does say something about our legal system. Our legal system is built on you really have to prove that someone committed a crime. Whether or not it looks like they committed another crime similarly, you might or might not be able to enter that into the courtroom when you are arguing a particular crime. But you know, our system is set up that you are innocent until absolutely proven guilty. We don't professionally use the term monster, but lay people do. There's a particular kind of callousness that comes along with someone who would be in a loving relationship with another person and cause the end of their life. You know, all murder is terrible. But there is a difference between someone who gets into a fight in a bar with the guy and, you know, somehow in the fight, this guy ends the other guy's life. They felt threatened. They were fighting. They had both been drinking. There is something different about that person than someone who is celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, lying in the bed every night, making plans with this person, knowing and planning for that person's death. And again, we don't know for sure. We do have this outstanding $1 million insurance policy that Michael Peterson was named in. We also know that Michael Peterson was known to have extramarital affairs on his wife Kathleen, and there's many accounts where all of his extramarital affairs were not with women, and some people believe that possibly she found out about him being romantically involved with other people, possibly men, and that was too damaging, too embarrassing, whatever it was, you know, and that put him into a rage. But that does not necessarily explain how that also happened to Elizabeth Ratcliffe years beforehand. Even his ability to enter such a plea, the Alford plea, really does suggest pretty genius criminal mind, assuming he did it. Certainly, he had an excellent group of lawyers who found a way to even reopen the case, because for most cases, once a conviction happens, that's it. So even to be granted a new trial suggested a really great legal team, but it also suggests a pretty decent human mind to assemble a great legal team and give them the information necessary to overturn such a thing. It was in the media, people could not, you know, believe that this had happened because, you know, Kathleen Peterson was known, you know, to be a dedicated wife. You know, what in the world happened to this woman? And if he committed this crime, he's a monster. And how is it that a monster was able to convince a team of people and then later a judge and jury to overturn a previous sentence and walk out of a courtroom? This case was something that really is discussed probably mostly among prosecutors. It really gave them something to chew on regarding how to prosecute a case as airtightly as humanly possible. What happens often is, to the prosecutors, this seems so obvious. This is a cut and dry case. We've got him. Look at him. Everyone agrees. We're going to go to court and we're going to get this conviction. But we have to remember there is an opposing team of attorneys that also are as shrewd, that have also been studying this information very carefully, and that are motivated to walk out of the courtroom with their client. And so I think what has been most educational about this case is the ability to utilize the legal system. right? We want everyone to have a fair trial. We absolutely demand it. We want everybody to have every advantage when they are defendants in trial, but we also see that it is on the prosecutor to make sure the case is as tight as possible. And I think this became not only a learning opportunity for people like me, forensic psychology people who are studying true crime, but also people who are budding or practicing prosecuting attorneys to make sure that they cover all of the bases.